Good morning. My name is Reverend Vaughan Amaré, and I welcome you to Northern Lights Spiritual Center. Northern Lights Spiritual Center is a community of people dedicated to using spiritual and practical principles to create lives we want to live. Northern Lights Spiritual Center offers practical and spiritual tools to make positive changes in our lives. We acknowledge our presence here on the traditional and unceded lands of the first peoples of Seattle, the Duwamish and Salish coastal peoples. These people are still here, and we join with them in how they continue to honor and bring to light their ancient heritage. We seek to resist the erasure of Indigenous histories as we work towards honoring and inviting the truth. Please join me for our opening song, In This Very Room, by Ron and Carol Harris. In this very room, there's quite enough love for all the world. And in this very room, there's quite enough joy for all the world. And there's quite enough peace and quite enough power to walk through our every fear. For Spirit, sweet Spirit, is in this very room. In this very room.
Good morning. And now is the time that we set aside each Sunday for a brief time to center ourselves, a brief meditation or contemplation, releasing all that has come before this moment, setting it aside, knowing that we can pick it up if we choose to later. So I just invite each of us to find a comfortable spot as you can, wherever you are, and do a few breathing exercises, breathing in deeply, taking that air in that feeds our body. So let us just take a nice deep breath in. Hold it and release. Again, take a nice deep breath in and feel your diaphragm expand. And release. One more time. Take it in and release. And in this time of anticipation, the season of anticipation, there's so many things to anticipate this time of year. The anticipation of the shortest night of the year, shortest day of the year. And again, the anticipation of light days becoming a little bit more light as we move towards spring. The anticipation of the holidays, Christmas, of all the different things that we celebrate. This is a time of year where there are numerous celebrations of different faiths, different cultures, each holding some sort of anticipation. And so I just invite each of us to close our eyes if you feel comfortable doing that. And do a little flashback to whatever holiday you celebrated as a child, or even a birthday, an upcoming birthday when you were a kid, and how you felt as this time approached, this holiday approached, this birthday approached. How did you feel inside? This feeling that working up to that, to the big reveal. And as you recall these feelings, this anticipation, this hopefully a joy-filled experience, allow yourself to relive that, to feel it again, to allow it to bubble up and touch you in ways that maybe you haven't been touched in a long time. So, just for a few moments, take that memory, those memories that you have of that anticipation, the excitement, and relive it. As you go through this time of year and each day, week, month of your life, just realize that you can always step back into these feelings. If they were feelings of joy and excitement, you can relive those, because our memory is one of our greatest gifts. And so with that, I invite you to move a little bit, to bring yourself back to whatever space you may be in. Open your eyes and return to the now. so it is. And our reading for today comes from a thing called Ernest Holmes Speaks. And it's from chapter 5 of that, and it's called The Light of God. Jesus told us not to judge according to appearances, because there is a perfection at the center of things. This is what he meant when he said, "Be ye therefore perfect, even as your Father in heaven is perfect." It seems to me that the only way we can translate the meaning of these words is to accept them in their simplicity and interpret them as though they actually meant what he said. For Jesus never wasted time on idle talk. The more we study the simplicity of his style, the more we discover that it reached to the very foundation of life itself. Jesus had reduced his spiritual philosophy to a few simple, fundamental facts that he taught and lived. The inner center of our being is what is meant by the word Christ, the anointed or the illumined. Christ means God in us. It means the divine son or daughter at the center of every person's life. If Jesus was right, there is a perfection forever established, a kingdom of God forever at hand, and a possibility of good that is available right now. We should reread the words of Jesus as though we had never heard them before. Since the teachings of Jesus contain the key to right living, it would do us well to consider their meaning. Jesus said, in effect, God has made you. The divine spirit is already within you. This is your Father in your heaven, who desires only your good. Spirit has already provided a law of mind, giving you the use of power greater than you are. And if you will only learn to live in recognition of this presence and in harmony with this law, then the miracle of life and love will take place. He coupled the knowledge of spiritual truth with the thought that there is a law of mind which acts upon our belief and brings into our experience those things which we believe. Choosing our path. We should realize that Jesus was not talking about any particular age. He was not talking about just himself. For over and over again he said that what he said, we could do also. What he did, we could do also. That what he was, or we may become. But it also, as though he were proclaiming, there is a presence within you that is already perfect. You are not worried. You need not worry over your previous mistakes, nor live in anxious anticipation of tomorrow. All of that is unnecessary. All you have to do is learn to live right today. And when you do, previous mistakes will be blotted out, and your future will be taken care of. But before this can happen, we must learn to live right today. It is in the moment of time that we are to make that great decision. It is in this day that we now are living that we must choose what path we are to follow. Shall we live in fear or in faith? Shall we live in confusion or in the peace that comes from the depth and abiding conviction that there is a power greater than we are, ready, willing, and able to work for us. I think the outstanding thing in the new spiritual outlook of today is that we are called on to invite this presence, to experiment with this power, and actually to live as though God were present with us right now. Jesus seemed to have laid no restriction on the willingness of this power greater than we are to operate for us, other than to say that everything we think and say and do should be based in consciousness of love, in a realization that we must become one with others, even as we already are one with God. This is why he prayed that they may be one, even as we are one. Training the mind to think differently is simple enough, but I would not say that it is easy. For a thing can be simple without being easy. And again, this is where faith must be used. Faith is a power greater than we are, based on the firm conviction that we live in a divine presence that wishes only good for us. The final surrender. Common sense should teach us that we did not create the universe, nor need we be responsible for the laws of nature. All we can do is use them. Now we are called on to reform all our thinking, to make a complete and final surrender to all littleness, fears, doubts, and uncertainties, to that great something within us that is calm and certain and sure. That something has never really left its divine kingdom, even though our minds have become so confused, so unhappy, and so filled with fear. This is the great challenge. It is also the great adventure. The adventure of faith in a power greater than we are. The challenge of a love that abides forever. Therefore, say to yourself quietly and with deep conviction, I realize that I am one in the eternal newness of life. All that spirit is creates in and through me. My body is alive with the life of God. My body is illuminated by the light of God. There is no darkness or discouragement, despair or defeat. My mind is refreshed in that one mind that eternally gives itself to its creation. All that God has is mine. I open my heart to accept the good gifts of joy, happiness, and enthusiasm right now. I open my heart to know that that which is forever ageless is my source. I decree that my body and my experience shall reflect the image of life in all of its newness. And I shall move through the days of my years with gladness in my mind. I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever, knowing that my cup is full to overflowing with the only life there is, the life and the eternal youth of God. And so it is.
So this is the last week of this month's chant because it's coming from an older song, and we'll be kind of through it next week with where we are in the season. So the words for the song are, O come, what's blessed and well. I find holy life within and tell my story and the loves that bring me here until the light of life appears. Rejoice, rejoice, what's blessed and well shall come to me, O Israel. And it's an adaptation of a song that I learned as a kid called O Come, Emmanuel. O come, what's blessed rejoice, what's blessed and well shall come to me, O Israel. Oh come, what's blessed and well, I find holy light within and tell my story in the love that brings me here, until the light of life appears. Rejoice, rejoice, what's blessed and well shall come to me, O Israel. So I just want us to take that in for a moment, that wish, that encouragement of deep peace. The song calls the deep peace of what have been identified as the elements. The wave, the air, the earth, the fire, the light. What is it to just allow ourselves to open to deep peace? I want us to start from that question, to start from that place. This month, the theme has been the journey of becoming. And the context for that is recognizing the stillness and peace. This month is an opportunity to celebrate many sacred and secular holidays all over the world. This week we are coming into solstice. And at solstice, we're approaching that moment between the dwindling light and the lengthening of the days that follow. So we might use the model of that's happening in the northern half of the earth and look to that as a time where we deliberately become still. And we deliberately listen to the still small voice within. For today, I want us to consider both the upcoming winter solstice, and I also want to harken back to my own upbringing with the notion of Advent. From a science of mind perspective, we teach something called spiritual mind treatment or affirmative prayer. And we release our words into what we call the automatic action of the law. To teach this to small children, we teach the idea of seed, soil, and plant. To consider how creation happens. And the notion of becoming still is once we've planted the seed, we need to enter into a time of patience and peace. As most people know, anytime you plant a seed, the minute you dig it up to see how it's doing, we stop the process of it being able to germinate. Now, patience, I don't know about you, but I can speak for myself. Sometimes patience is not the easiest skill to practice. I'm making you practice patience now as I wait to speak. There are all kinds of ways that we can engage and employ a variety of spiritual practices. So with solstice, I was taught from the vantage point of a culture that really only valued itself. So I was taught from white Christian culture that the pagans had come up with things and then the Christians revealed what was true. And as I look back on that now, and really I was a lot younger when I started looking at it and thinking that that was a really kind of unsettling view of the world. And it was a view that I didn't really want to entertain so much. Because I never really felt like I fit into that view of the world that was being promulgated. There was something in me that just had a niggle that I didn't fit, that I wasn't right according to that. And it's taken years to come to terms with that sense that something doesn't fit. I don't know if any of you have ever had that experience where you might have been raised in one way and then it just didn't seem to speak the fullness of truth that it claimed to have had. So the notion of this upcoming holiday that many Christians celebrate, the birth of Jesus, was really a kind of story that got put together well after the time that Jesus was around, that so many Christians claim to celebrate and so many Christians claim to identify as a significant figure. The notion of Christmas, the birth of this Jesus, was adopted, that's a nice way to say it, stolen is a more accurate way to say it, from a whole variety of other stories. There are so many stories of virgin birth. There are so many stories of the divine coming into earthly presence. The solstice was one of the starting points of that story. That light was being reborn. That the earth itself was being reborn. And the notion of light as having divine aspects, or light having divine characteristics. Now, in my upbringing, I certainly wasn't even taught about the solstice. And I certainly wasn't even taught about the notion that Christianity had adopted certain things. They did give a nod to the Hebrew tradition, because we had the whole Old Testament, which shared the story of the Israelites and the Hebrews with a kind of quaint notion that wasn't that cute. They thought they had the truth, but then Jesus came along and then the real truth was revealed. And as an adult, as I look at that, it's so patronizing. It's so belittling. The notion that all of Hebrew scripture was this great foretelling of Jesus. And like we're giving a nod to the Jewish people. But then we turn around as Catholics and we also give a finger to the Jewish people, because we blame the Jewish people for everything bad that happens to Jesus. Jesus gets crucified, and it's because the Jewish people got together and they said, crucify him. Don't go after the other guy. Go after Jesus. So even though Jesus was Jewish, and even Catholics recognize Jesus as Jewish, there was a maligning of a whole faith. And there were years and years of maligning. There were years of maligning women. There were years of maligning other cultures. Even within the teachings, one of the notions for Jesus was that there were wise men who came from the East. That meant they weren't really familiar with any of the religions that were happening in the West. But they were wise people, they were wise men, and ultimately the notion of women are bad, the Catholic Church had this amazing thing where the expression of Mary, the Mother of God, kept showing up. And she kept being really important. No matter what the Catholic faith did to wipe out the experience of women, the experience of Mary kept pushing herself forward, saying, you better look at it. There is a femininity to the divine that you just are not touching. And I say all this, I put all of this context because I think sometimes it's good to acknowledge all that's going on. We live in a world that is full of conflict. We live in a world that is engaged in fearful circumstances. We are at a time where a bunch of people, in response to COVID-19, the coronavirus, there could be a couple of different reactions. One reaction is, I'm so over it. It's like, can't we get back out into the world and do everything we wanted to do? And can't we put away our masks? And can't we just be done with it? Michael's phone was just making a message, or making
obnoxious
a
phone call.
buzzing sound. So I paused because Michael wanted to check that out. So people are either over it or they're saying it never happened, which is just kind of crazy in my mind, because we have one of the people who has attended here and who has supported Northern Light Spiritual Center, Daryl Rogers, is a public health worker, a public health leader, and he communicated that King County is at serious risk of just huge multiplication, a huge spreading of the newest variant of coronavirus, the Omicron. So we're living in this time where some people's reaction is, oh, it's not really real, and then they might get the virus and then be like, afterwards, then they're saying, well, it is really real, and it's one of my experiences that's really bad. Or maybe they don't get to say that, maybe they just die, because we've had more than 800,000 deaths from coronavirus in the United States. Now, I'm certainly not creating a fuzzy, warm picture. So I want to take a step back and think of how we can respond to what is in a deliberate, thoughtful way. One of the ways I want to do that is by hearkening back to one of my experiences as a child with a practice of Advent, acknowledging and looking at and celebrating Advent. And I'm going to use 4 candles to symbolize that. And when I was little, each week we'd light a candle. So the first week we'd light 1 candle. Second week we would light the first and then the second candle. Third week we'd light the first, the second, and then a third candle. And the fourth week we would light all 3 and then the final candle. The first candle symbolized hope. And I want us to lean into the notions of each one of the meanings as a new thought variant on how to go into the world. A metaphysical interpretation of Advent. We can choose to anticipate, reflect upon, and celebrate the Christ within, the light within, the power within, the beauty within. Advent was about waiting. The word Advent means coming. The coming of the inner Christ, the coming of the inner light, the coming of the inner beauty, the coming of the inner peace. How do we hold ourselves differently if we see ourselves as vehicles, as if we see ourselves as that through which the magnificence of the divine is going to show up. So just take a moment. Take a moment and just breathe in to the experience when we are vehicles through which greater goodness is coming into the world. I'm seeing our practitioner on this Zoom call, and I'm seeing her, and I know that she is a vehicle through which this whole new creative expression is coming into the world. She is doing a line of children's clothing, and she has been working in design, and she has been working in just making people look good for her career. Everywhere that Stephanie goes, Stephanie is deliberate about looking good. She has people at stores that wait for her appearance because they always know that Stephanie is someone who is going to look good. So Stephanie's coming forth into the world. People anticipate this beauty, this looking good. They anticipate that how she is presenting herself is an inspiration for how they and how I might be. As long as we've been doing our distance experience of Northern Light Spiritual Center, I have to say that typically she's come on either third or fifth Sundays, and I'm always so eager to see what is it that Stephanie is going to be wearing. How is Stephanie going to be moving into Northern Lights and bringing fashion and bringing style and bringing beauty? So with this first light of hope, we can be in a place of hope because we know that new light is coming. We can be in a place of hope because with solstice, it has gotten very dark in the Seattle area. The amount of time that it is light out is not a whole lot. So what is it to just settle in and let ourselves feel hope? Not just think hope, but to actually feel it, to let us breathe into that. One of the things about science of mind is sometimes it can be very much in our heads. A comment about our services is that sometimes we're very intellectual. It's easier to speak from the head than it is to go into our hearts and the challenge of being in our souls. It's a messier place in our hearts and in our souls. It's a messier place in our bodies. The head can be very detached and it can be very neat and clean and orderly. But life isn't like that. How often is the practice of living so different from how neat and orderly we can make it in our heads? So, to get into hope, I'm going to actually do something that is kind of anti-mind. Every time we don't know something, may be a time that we feel a bit uncomfortable. Because if we have to answer, I don't know. I don't know about you, but I'm not comfortable answering I don't know. It's a position of vulnerability to say I don't know. But there's a hope with I don't know. There is a Korean Zen master, Seung Sun, who says we need to keep our don't know mind. There's a value to the practice of beginner's mind. There's a hopefulness that arises with beginner's mind, with the not knowing, with letting go of our expertise. What happens when we just let ourselves not know? What happens when we let ourselves be in that not knowing? Charles Fillmore, co-founder of Unity, discussed the whole notion, the Christian notion of virgin birth and virgin pregnancy, and described it as having a deeply metaphorical significance. Christian tradition tells us that Mary was not only virgin by reason of her being unmarried, but that she was also a virgin in mind and heart. So just as the Christ was born to one whose mind and heart are pure and uncorrupted, so too is the Spirit of Christ born into us with a conscious mind and heart that is pure and clean. What opens in us with the hope of coming back to that beginner's mind, to that not knowing. So consider ourselves or consider others who come to us not knowing. Might we make ourselves a welcoming place rather than a space that's tired or rather than a space that's afraid of the not knowing? Can we give space to the hope that comes from a not knowing place? One of the things that struck me this morning is that hope might be about letting go of the hoping for something else in the world, but a hoping from ourselves. A hoping about what we might become as we let light and life be born through us. Now the second candle the second week of Advent was around faith. I've talked before about kind of the centrality of faith for me. There's so much that we live in that is rooted in faith. We embody faith like so many other people before us. We can choose to step forward, and the image that I'm going to call to people's minds is, has anybody ever seen the tarot card and the figure of the Fool leaping forward in faith? A movie that's made this kind of famous is, I think it's the third story of Indiana Jones, where his father sent him his journal, and his father has always been annoyingly interested in the Holy Grail. And his Grail journal comes to Indy, and he's like, what is wrong? My dad would never send me this. And as the story proceeds, he finds that his father has sent him the journal thinking that I'll keep it safe. I'm going to send it to Indy. And Indy, as Indy always does, is ready to jump into the adventure. And in Indiana Jones and in this process of faith, he ends up falling for the same woman that his father fell for. Kind of creepy. Yep, kind of creepy. But when they've got both Indiana Jones and his father, and Indiana, it was never the name that Indiana received. Indiana was the name of the dog. And that was one of the telling moments in that story. Indiana was a nickname, and he liked it better than Junior because it was named after his father. But he didn't want to be called Junior, and he didn't want his father's name. He had the faith to assume a different identity. But Indiana goes on the Grail quest at a point where they shoot his father within the realm where they believe the Grail may be. And Indiana has to follow everything that was in his father's journal. And the second task is the task of leaping out in faith. And it's like he has to somehow bridge this gap. He has to make himself like the fool on the tarot card of just leaping, of stepping out in faith. Sherry had shown us at her home that she has this beautiful image in her living room, and it really struck me as that it's an Indian woman with a zither, and she's like dancing in space, dancing in this place. How often are we willing to leap into the unknown and step into the unknown? For Indy, and Sherry is showing it on Zoom. So this person is dancing into the space of, and Indy was only able to do it with throwing a little bit of dust and then seeing that there was a way that was hidden. Faith is about stepping into what's hidden, into what is unseen. So I light this second candle, and I ask us to light the candle of, when do we move forward in faith? When are we willing to step forward in faith without knowing? So it draws into that first thing of hope, that beginner's mind, that I'm not knowing mind. Ernest Holmes proposed that neither precedent nor the past bind principle. We have the power within us to change our thinking. Do we have the faith to change our thinking? Do we have the faith to change what's in our heart? Do we have the faith to change what's deep in our soul? It's one of the things in the story of Mary giving birth to Jesus. She was a virgin girl, and she was told by an angel, you're going to carry the Son of God. And Mary had the faith to say, yes, I will. A lot of times there isn't a lot of credit given to Mary. At the time when all of this was happening, giving birth when you hadn't had relations with your husband was a very, very bad thing. But she was willing to act in faith that God would do something through her. How might we take on the faith of Mary? that's the question I invite us to consider. So the first question is, when might we hope? Hope starting in ourselves, rather than hoping in the world around us, but hope starting in ourselves. And when might we have the faith, the kind of faith that Mary has? When we decide to be no longer held down by our past, by the cultural beliefs into which we've been born, that we might do what God is calling us, what the angel calls us. So there's faith, there's hope, there's faith. The third week in Advent is joy. So I am lighting a third candle. The first for hope, the second for faith, and the third for joy. Now, joy, in my Catholic upbringing, lit a different color. It was no longer purple. It was pink. And it was this different color, and it was this different experience. And joy is a different experience. So just take a moment, and I want us to touch on some joy in our life. Let ourselves feel some presence of joy. This week, one of the teachers I work with said when I came to the room, she said, we can bring some real joy to Reverend Vaughan. And what they did is they had this CNN 10 video, and in it, and she said, you're just going to enjoy it. You are just going to enjoy it. And the video was this episode, this moment where they have these foxes at this fox rescue, and this woman just like can tickle the fox, and the fox just giggles. And I just could not help but laugh because I had never heard a fox giggling. And the woman was petting the fox, and the fox was just giggling, giggling, giggling. So look it up. Do a search for it. Fox giggling. And it's like now we know what the fox sounds like. There's this whole song. What does the fox sound like? And they had answered the question of this fox just giggling hysterically. And the fox was just chewing on this woman's finger, and I don't know about you, but I don't know that I would be any too eager to let a fox chew on me.
No, we have a dog that chews on me.
But we have a dog that chews on us, and this fox was just giggling this sound that I could not help but be brought into a space of joy. It was it was this giggling sound that I had never heard the likes of. Joy arises in this season. A woman named Rachel Carson had made this statement. A child's world is fresh and new and beautiful, full of wonder and excitement and enchantment. It is our misfortune that for most of us, that clear-eyed vision, that true instinct for what is beautiful and awe-inspiring is dimmed and even lost before we reach adulthood. Rachel said, if I had influence with the good fairy who is supposed to preside over all children, I should ask that her gift to each child in the world be a sense of wonder so indestructible that it would last throughout life. We can know principle intellectually, but to apply it and integrate this knowledge, noticing the difference in our changed behavior, is another thing altogether. Joy that is celebrated with the third week of Advent, that third lit candle, that pink candle, which is different than those other two purple candles. Joy is something that we know it by feeling it. Can we give ourselves the space to feel the joy of this season? Can we give ourselves the space to just feel joy? Can we give ourselves the possibility of joy in a world where joy doesn't look like it really fits? I was talking earlier about COVID-19 and the new Omicron variant. It's hard to feel joy when there's just more bad stuff. This week at schools, many schools, the Tacoma School District closed because social media had put out a challenge. This was the anniversary of Sandy Hook, which was one of the first well-known shootings, the school shootings. And over again, we've had people come forward and say, I'm gonna pray for you and the children who've been shot. But I'm not going to do anything different about guns, because we keep falling into this notion of guns kill people, but people don't kill people. But it's people with guns that kill people. And we have a whole part of the country that is so happy to be carrying guns and claiming that guns don't kill people. People kill people. People with guns kill people. But how do we come to joy in all of these times? What if, like Rachel Carson, we could sustain that childish moment, sustain that child vision, no matter what is in the world? The third week of Advent was about joy. And I was reacquainted with joy, with that notion of just listening to the fox giggle. So the spiritual practices of hope and faith and joy brings us to that fourth week of Advent, which is peace. Deep peace of the wave, the running wave. Deep peace of the falling air. Deep peace of the gentle earth. Deep peace of the dark night and the light of the stars and the lighting of the candles. In the stories of the season, the angels proclaim, "Let there be peace on earth." How might we turn to peace in the midst of everything that's going on earth? It's a choice. How might we choose peace? Angels, metaphysically, are our highest thoughts. If angels proclaim peace on earth, a lesson for peace is that I heard was, if you want peace, work for justice. So how might each of us bring peace forward, bring more justice forward? Stephanie is designing clothes so that families can have the peace of just knowing that they can put their children into these outfits that are just going to make them look so sweet, so adorable. That when you see that child, you just can't help but smile because of what they're wearing and how they look. And that family's going to feel peace because the child's going to be wearing this, and it is going to feel so good, and their child is not going to fight them getting dressed. Their child is like, oh, it's that. I want to wear that. There's that sense of peace. Stephanie is creating peace for families with this vision and this notion of how they can feel so perfect that they just want to put it on. How might we bring peace and justice into the world the way Stephanie is deliberately designing, so that kids want to wear what they wear? What little thing might we do to make our world a better place? Dorothy Day of the Catholic Worker Movement practiced that notion of, if you want peace, you work for justice. And this justice was, what one small thing could she do? What one small thing can each of us do this week to bring more justice into the world? Bringing more justice might be Stephanie's design of those clothing. It might be Reba answering a question on the lines where people don't know, but Reba knows, and Reba can answer. That more might be known. Michael is going to send out images with beauty and words with inspiration. And peace and justice will happen. By putting ourselves out there. By bringing what we can bring. This week, as we head to the solstice and we meet the darkest night with light, we meet the longest night with the peace of light, and we let ourselves be in the starlight and the candlelight. Ernest Holmes had said that the thing that stands between you and greater good is a thing of thought and nothing else. It is not reality that we must change, but our reaction to it. Ernest Holmes wrote that years ago in this thing called You, that it is not reality we must change, but our reaction to it. We might have peace with our reaction. So for today's affirmation, I'm going to invite you to say it with me. I prepare to birth new light by living in hope, faith, joy, and peace. So there's going to be two parts to it.
Ooh.
So the first part is, I prepare to birth new light. I prepare to birth new light by living in hope, faith, joy, and peace. By living in hope, faith, joy, and peace. So we've all done done that now one time. Let's do it a second time. I prepare to birth new light by living in hope, faith, joy, and peace. And one more time to really take it in, to really make it solid, to really feel it and feel it. I prepare to birth new light by living in hope, faith, joy, and peace. And so it is.
Alrighty then. Thank you, Reverend Vaughan, for that lesson. And the last thing that you said about not reality to change, but ourselves, it immediately took me to the Matrix, where the young child is holding up the spoon and says, you know, it's not the spoon that's bending, that you're bending, that you're changing, that you're that you're changing instead of the spoon.
It's not the spoon that bends.
Yeah, it's not the spoon that bends. So, we want to thank everybody for joining this week. Wherever you are out in the ethers, your presence is valued, and we are grateful. We're grateful for this year that we're almost through. I'm actually quite excited about next year. I like the number, 2022. There's something about it that I think gives hope. And we were at a gathering last night we celebrated the solstice. There's a ritual that we do with this other couple and some other friends. But we had to do it on Saturday because Tuesday doesn't work for a lot of people. Anyway, and we write down things we want to get rid of, release from this year, and what we want coming into next year. And the one thing that it amazed me, that came to me, that I want more of in the new year, and Reverend Vaughan touched on it, is wonder. I want to experience more wonder. So I just leave you with that and asking, maybe you might think about that, about what you want next year to be like, what you want to bring into your life. And I invite you for next week, if you're going to be here, to make sure that you have, I know some people do have paper and pen handy, because there'll be a little exercise in there. No test, no quiz or anything, just so I invite you to bring a writing utensil and something to write on. And so with that, I just want to give thanks for everyone here, give thanks for life and for the divine that flows in, around, and through each of us. That divine presence, that divine light that expresses as us in this life. I give thanks for each life and each light. And so I release it.